Hi, it's Michael. I'm the Acadian Bitcoiner. I've been offline for the last little while. I had a second spinal cord surgery about 2 months ago, and I've been offline, but I've recovered nicely, and it's time to start producing Bitcoin content again. One of the significant macro factors in place in the Bitcoin market right now is BlackRock's application with the SEC to launch a Bitcoin spot ETF. I recently came across an excellent video by a fellow YouTuber named British HODL on the topic of why BlackRock want a Bitcoin spot ETF. And I'm sharing that video with his permission. Please watch that video, and there's a link to his YouTube channel in the description below. So please give him a follow as well. If you like this content, please like, please subscribe, and please turn on notifications. I'm Michael. I'm the Acadian Bitcoiner. I produce regular content on Bitcoin for beginners, especially Zoomers and seniors. Thank you.
I was sitting here thinking about what BlackRock's goal with Bitcoin is and why they would suddenly start putting all this effort into getting a Bitcoin ETF approved and putting in all this effort for marketing. Larry Fink's out there talking about Bitcoin on CNBC, etc., etc. And the wheels are starting to turn, and all these things are starting to happen. Like, what is the end goal for BlackRock when it comes to Bitcoin? And I wanted to just cover, the direction that I think BlackRock will take in this market, and give you my prediction on how I think BlackRock and the institutions are going to dominate this industry. So this is really for people who are sitting here worried about whether they should get into Bitcoin, worried about whether while you're sitting here thinking about whether you should get into Bitcoin, BlackRock is out here accumulating all the Bitcoin and planning to accumulate and control the whole industry. We're not the same. We're not the same. You are not the same as BlackRock. BlackRock is very strategic. BlackRock is not going to come out here willy-nilly and just decide, okay, I'm going to go place a market order at 10 a.m. It doesn't work like that. They're going to be very, very strategic, and they're very, very professional at acquiring assets. When the ESG thing happened, there was one firm that owned a bunch of forest land that could sell carbon credits, right? BlackRock. Surprise, surprise. So, the other thing is that the ESG overall, when you look at the returns that ESG has generated, while it might be portrayed as a really good thing for the environment and everything else, it has not generated two positive returns. I mean, it's below inflation levels or below real inflation levels of returns. And so their investors are looking at them going, what the hell doesn't make sense? Like, my return has been so low. So what's the solution? BlackRock has a couple different things that they can do. Number one solution, which is what I think is happening right now, is you figure out how to take the best performing asset known to mankind and you make that ESG friendly, quote unquote ESG friendly. And when you do that, you can now put that asset into the bucket of ESG, and then over the next decade, your ESG bucket now looks like it's giving you, 20% a year returns, whereas before it's giving you 5% a year returns. So now the idea of ESG pays off, Bitcoin pays off, everyone's happy, the clients are happy, BlackRock's happy, BlackRock looks good, etc., etc., etc. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to happen in a very strategic way. So firstly, I think BlackRock is probably already has acquired or is acquiring Bitcoin as we speak. They understand that this is that there is finality of supply here, and they fundamentally understand that. They understand how important that is. If they didn't understand how important that was, they would not have bought forests. They would not have bought forest lands to sell carbon credits. If you can get carbon credits and you can get trees, it was just an unlimited amount of trees everywhere. There's no value in the trees. There's no value in property if you can build an unlimited amount of property in an unrestricted way. There's no value in anything if you can just have an unlimited amount of it. The only very value of life is the fact that it's scarce. So BlackRock truly understands the scarcity argument. I believe they truly fundamentally understand it. And here's the thing, it would be unwise. I know there's a bunch of people that out there, the $1,000 net worthers and the doom and gloom boomer gang, that believe BlackRock doesn't understand. You think that you on Twitter, reading news once it's posted, retweeting other anonymous people's tweets, you think you know more about the hardest asset known to mankind than BlackRock. You are extremely arrogant. Extremely arrogant. I don't care what Larry Fink's been saying on television. If I own a firm that big, I'm assigning 100 people, and their entire life process and their entire life purpose is to figure out Bitcoin. What is there to understand about Bitcoin? What are we missing? What are we not understanding? And I've done this years ago before I really take some action here. And this was evidenced, right? Because they had that report that came out, the internal BlackRock report that was leaked a year or so ago, a year and a half ago, whatever it was, right? Like, they understand what Bitcoin is, and you sitting there going, BlackRock doesn't understand what Bitcoin is. You are a fool. Got to look yourself deep in the eyes in the mirror and question whether you are talking sense or not. You are a fool if that's what you think. BlackRock has more people, I guarantee you, has more people than you know spending their entire day trying to figure out Bitcoin. Right? And now they've figured it out. Now they want to take a gamble at it. So the ETF is coming out. BlackRock applies for the ETF. What does this do? This allows BlackRock and the institutions to suck up all the Bitcoin in the world as much as possible to push it into the ETF. And there is major advantages of that, right? Because number one, if you can control the price appreciation of an asset, that's more than enough for most people, right? Because whether you want to admit it or not, most of the people that talk about, America's so bad, the UK's so bad, Australia's so bad, Canada's so bad, are not doing anything about it. They're not going out there. They're not leaving the country. They're not doing anything because they've got a house, they've got family, they've got parents, they've got kids, they've got a wife, they've got a husband. They've got commitments in the country. So the most they can do is tweet about it and talk about it. They're not actually physically getting up and leaving. So in that scenario, the idea of sovereignty is less valuable. Most people just want price exposure. Most people relate price exposure to sovereignty. Well, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you how it is, which is why an ETF wrapper is so important for Bitcoin, because it allows people to get that price exposure, and through the price exposure, it allows them to increase their wealth and then gives them more sovereignty. It might be a version of sovereignty and might not be true sovereignty, but it gives them a version of sovereignty, because if someone is worth $10 million instead of $100,000, they feel more sovereign. So they're now going to suck in all this Bitcoin into this ETF. And I believe the purpose of really doing that is to control as much Bitcoin as possible. So now you use the ETFs to control it, and now they'll add other little services and this, that, and the other. And one of the biggest, most profitable things that's going to come to Bitcoin is lending on Bitcoin. Because the amount of money that's generated, the amount of credit expansion that happens that's generated in the world because of lending on existing assets is huge, right? So, and I guarantee you it's going to be much more safer for an institution like BlackRock to lend against the Bitcoin ETF than it is the Bitcoin, right? And if you look at this, Chamath actually did this. Chamath, contributed his Bitcoin to GBTC, right? And he owns the shares of GBTC and he just holds on to them. That's what he did, right? Because this makes sense for someone who is the new buyer of Bitcoin. This makes much more sense to them because the new buyer of Bitcoin is much more sophisticated, much more sharper, and has access to resources and contacts that can allow them to generate liquidity on an asset that the market accepts at a much lower cost basis. For example, right, if the cost on borrowing against Bitcoin through Unchained Capital is 12% a year, through a market facility, it might only be 8% a year, right? Through an ETF wrapper, it might only be 8% a year, right? And that might not make any difference to someone who owns one Bitcoin, but someone who's playing with $400 million, that makes a big difference. You've got to start thinking in an expanded way. The game is changing. These people are different. They are not the same people as you and I. They're not going to be sitting on Twitter and YouTube talking about Bitcoin. They're going to be buying Bitcoin. They're going to be waiting for it to go up. They're going to be liquidating it through these services. And by the way, I'm going to do a video on how I plan to spend my wealth without selling any of my Bitcoin. So make sure you subscribe to the channel for that. But they're going to be doing and having access to these different facilities. And these are extremely, extremely important because people need access to liquidity. And the banking system's going to love it, right? The banking system's going to love it because if they borrow against Bitcoin and Bitcoin has this parabolic rise and everyone starts borrowing against it, what happens to the deposit? Right? And this is what my new friend, Peter Dunworth, has been talking about. Right? You want to create liquidity on top of Bitcoin because that liquidity can be used to continuously circulate within the banking system. So the ETF to me is the best way to do that for the banking system, for BlackRock. So what do? They apply for an ETF once they figure out how to get it approved. And they apply for that, and they're very, very confident that they're going to get that, considering they've only ever had one denial of an ETF application in their entire history. And that application, the one that was denied, the whole industry was denied. So really, they've got a 100% success rate when it comes to actual products that make, or industries that make the market. So they're going to get this. They're going to get this ETF, and they're going to start sucking in all this Bitcoin. There will be people that convert their Bitcoin and put it into this product. Whether you want to judge them or not, I don't give a shit, right? Whether if you are $1,000 net worther and you're going, oh no, but it's about your freedom, someone who's worth $400 million understands the game much better than you do. So, and 400 million, I'm talking small money, right? There's going to be people with $1 billion of Bitcoin. They completely understand the game and all the financing options that are available much better than you do as a $1,000 holder of Bitcoin. Right? You could tweet about it. They're actually doing something about it, right? And again, this might sound rude and it might come across as offensive to some people watching this, but this is the truth. You have to be aware of this because that's the buyer. If you don't become aware of what these latest financial, tools are going to be for you to actually take the Bitcoin that you have, the value you've accrued, generate liquidity on it so you can do other things without having to sell it. You are going to sell your Bitcoin to these people. They will happily give you $1 million per Bitcoin once they understand it, once they get it, once it's out there. They will happily give you $1 million. Why? Because they truly understand the finality of the scarcity of the asset. They understand how important it is to acquire as much of an asset as possible to control the market. Why do you think BlackRock is buying up single-family homes? I read a statistic. Only 41% of single-family homes, I believe, in the USA are owned by the people who actually live there. Think about that. So this is already happening in the property market. It's about to happen in Bitcoin, and it's better in Bitcoin because I don't need to send a team nowhere. Right? Once I own the asset, it's on the blockchain, that is done. I reduce my costs. I infinitely reduce my costs of managing that particular asset. Instead of having a team of 2,000 people over the country making sure valuations are staying on point, etc., I've now got a team of 200 analyzing the market. So this is going to happen, and their first step is applying for that ETF. The next step, which is where the ESG part comes in, is what you saw with KPMG. KPMG put out a report, and they said Bitcoin is actually ESG friendly. You don't think that within the next 6 to 9 months, which is what I've been saying on Twitter, 6 to 9 months, that a major publication like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Washington Post, something like that, is going to put out a piece on why Bitcoin is ESG friendly. If you don't think that's what's going to happen, you're a moron, right? Because if I control the media and I influence the media, right, what I want to do is I want to acquire as much of this asset as possible. Now I want to convince my investors that they need to acquire as much of this asset as possible. So now I'm going to go and tell the biggest media organization in the world to do an article on why Bitcoin is ESG friendly, and I'll give them all the data to prove why it is. So now they turn around and say, okay, cool, Bitcoin is now ESG friendly. So now it's in the media. Now every single fund out there that thought about ESG because BlackRock pressured them into it says, wait a second, all right? Come in close. Wait a second. Come in close. Wait a second. You mean to tell me we can tell people that we're being ESG friendly and make 80% CAGR a year? Yes. Get into as much of that asset as possible. They've got to do it in a diversified way, so it's never going to be 100% of their ESG allocation, but it's going to be an allocation. And all this time, we're talking about an asset that's completely finite. So what's the next step after they get that capital in? Well, the next step they're already doing as well, which is own the miners, right? They want to own the industry. BlackRock doesn't just come out and say, oh, we'll take a little part of it. They want the whole thing. So they're now going to start increasing their stakes in the miners. And they're now going to start trying to control the miners and trying to get majority interest in all of these miners. So this is the game plan here. Once that happens, once they control the Bitcoin, once they control the miners, once they control the ESG narrative, Bitcoin will now become friendly for finance. So the next step of that, and this might take 6 to 8 years, the next step of that will be, 8 years onwards, will be to figure out how to integrate Bitcoin in finance. Because now, wait a second, are you telling me that we can use Bitcoin and actually help the environment when we do transactions, when we start doing foreign currency transactions? Whoa, that's a real thing? Cool, buy Strike. Great, Strike's now an ESG friendly company because now we're now promoting the idea of we're saving the environment by using Bitcoin to do international transactions. This saves the carbon footprint by reducing down the number of people that we have stamping forms for every single transfer, the blah, 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 blah. It's all instant. Great. So now they start controlling financial services when it comes to Bitcoin. Oh, people want to lend, people want to borrow against their Bitcoin. Cool, we already got that happening. We've already got that happening because all you got to do if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin is go and put your Bitcoin into the ETF, right? Put your Bitcoin into the ETF, and you can borrow against it. Once you borrow against it, guess what happens? You borrow against it, you take that borrowing, and you put it into your bank account, and now the bank has generated liquidity to now lend against. So that starts working. This whole thing, and as the price of that asset, right, goes up, you borrow more against it and you put more money into the deposit into the bank. Now the bank can lend against that. So this whole thing is designed for BlackRock to own the future of the expansion of the US dollar empire. Now there's going to be some of you, the $1,000 net worthers that go, oh my God, this is so bad. You can't control it. Because Bitcoin is money for everyone. You cannot control what they're going to do. The byproduct of this is that you'll have a multiple millions of dollars of price action on Bitcoin, right? You'll have that multiple millions of dollars of price discovery because of the scarcity of the asset. But Bitcoin is going to help the expansion of the US dollar. This is how it's going to work because this is how it always works when assets go up in value. Assets go up in value. People borrow against those assets. That borrowing gets dumped into the banking system expands. So that's why you have this rotating circle jerk until the whole thing falls apart. But in the medium term, and I'm talking medium term, when I say medium term, I mean 25 to 30 years. I'm not talking about, 5 years. I'm talking 25 to 30 years, right? This is going to cause that expansion, and it's a different way to create expansion in the world. So the ETF is extremely important. That's why they got into it, because they understand that normal the normal average wealthy person wants to own something through an ETF. You don't have any accounting headaches. You don't have any headaches as far as chain analysis goes. You don't have any headaches as far as accounting goes. You don't have any of those headaches. Just buy the ETF. Done. Everyone knows how to deal with an ETF. So this is what I think is the plan. They want to control the whole industry, right? And everything hems on asset control, controlling the main players in the industry, which is why they have all these large shareholdings in all of the biggest miners, and ultimately financial services. Because the more financial services get adopted onto Bitcoin, the value of the price discovery of Bitcoin goes up. So they will encourage you to borrow against your Bitcoin, right? It makes sense. They'll they'll create the incentive for you to borrow through the financial system. But this is the agenda for BlackRock. And while all of this is going on, ultimately the most beautiful thing about Bitcoin is they can't actually control the underlying Bitcoin. They can control the however many Bitcoin get put into that ETF, but you will benefit from the price discovery of this asset, even if you are a hodler holding Bitcoin in as a bearer instrument, which is what it's designed to be. You will benefit from the price discovery of it as people use it to control the financial industry. So there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of depth to the game plan that BlackRock has, and I think hopefully this gives you an idea of the steps that I've laid out. So you're gonna get the ETF first, ESG friendly next. You're then going to get the controlling more of the infrastructure, and then you're going to get the idea of financial services, etc., etc., etc. So, and bear in mind, paying millions of dollars for a Bitcoin is nothing to these people. Is nothing to these people. You have to hold on to your Bitcoin as hard as you possibly can. That's why I encourage everyone, please go find fiat generation opportunities. Please go do that. Please go do that. Go find fiat generating opportunities and protect your Bitcoin at all costs. Stop spending your Bitcoin for pieces of fucking art. This is the most important asset humanity has ever discovered, and you want to spend it right now while BlackRock is getting into this whole thing? This is crazy. It's insane what people are doing. Hold on to your Bitcoin as hard as you can. That should be the mantra for you. And remember, there's only 3 rules to Bitcoin. But before I get to those 3 rules, I want to say, if you are finding these videos interesting and you are finding the understanding of Bitcoin from a unique perspective, a traditional finance perspective interesting, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And more importantly, the faster you subscribe, the faster YouTube shows this to other people that also need to understand this. So it just helps each other. That's all I'm asking for. I'm asking for you to just click subscribe on YouTube, and I appreciate it in advance. And ultimately, there's only 3 rules to Bitcoin, which is step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, and step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.